Think about a time that you were with a group of people and the conversation just flowed. You were talking about different topics and everyone was participating, and it just was simple and easy. Now, think about a time that you were part of a discussion. Maybe you were leading it or someone else, and it felt like someone was pulling teeth to get people to participate. It was crickets in the room. No one wanted to share, or someone took over the conversation and wouldn't let anyone else have a word in. Well, this thing we call discussion is often one of the key elements of our leading of small groups and Sunday school classes. Why? Well, because we don't want to just stand up and talk to people and then have them walk out without any participation. We know that adult learners really need to be active in their learning, but we also know that having a conversation and leading it well can be difficult. And so in this session, I want to address some things that help you think about how to lead a discussion well and to recognize the different roles that people will play in those conversations. So let's begin by looking at, what are some keys to leading a discussion well? And we begin by simply, have a plan. If you are getting ready to gather a group of people together and study God's word and lead a discussion at some point in that time period, how are you going to go about that? Now, you want to have maybe some discussion prompts or questions ready, recognizing that every plan is simply a plan. It doesn't mean you have to follow it exactly that way. Also recognizing that maybe you've been handed some curricular materials from someone, some suggested questions, and that's a great way to start. But also recognize that those questions were written by someone who doesn't know your small group. And so use those maybe as a starting place, but create a plan. Think through some potential ways that you could get the conversation rolling. And one of the ways you want to start that plan is by having a good start. What are some keys to having a good start? Well, here is a couple of those. First of all, you need to have a conversation starter that gets everyone participating. And so think about your learners and make sure that you're asking something that everyone can respond to. Don't put anyone on the spot. Make sure that you're not asking a question that's too personal to begin with, something that maybe everyone has an experience with so that everyone can participate. In fact, one of the ways to maybe start well is to ask a question and ask for maybe a 1 or 2 word response. That then limits the participation of everyone and also encourages simple participation. And so have a way to get the conversation rolling. That often just helps get things moving in the right direction. And then once you've started and you continue down your plan, now your job is kind of traffic control. You need to guide the conversation. What that will mean is making sure that you're spending enough time on a question or a topic, but not too much, to make sure that someone isn't taking over the conversation and making sure that others who maybe are hesitant but are signaling to you that I'd like to participate are invited into the conversation. You want to keep the conversation on track, and if someone starts to head down another trail of conversation, you need to stop and reflect, okay, is that a worthy trail to follow? Is that a helpful one? Or no, I need to bring us all back to the conversation that I needed to have us have. You want people to contribute but not dominate. You also need to allow for times of silence. You need to allow for people to stop and reflect. One of the ways I have done this with college students, with adults, is to ask them a question and then say, I want you to think about this for 30 seconds. Maybe even write some things down before you respond. That gives people an opportunity to process the question and to think about their answer so that they can participate. It also slows down the conversation a bit and keeps those that often will jump in right away from holding back slightly. You want to invite everyone into the conversation and continue it flowing. And as you do so, you want to be sure that you are listening well. Now, of course, you're listening to the conversation. But as a leader, one of the things I have often found is that when I ask a question and someone is responding, I'm sometimes thinking ahead to the next question, and I'm not actually fully engaged in listening to their response. If I were listening to their response, well, I might ask a follow-up question. I might ask for them to clarify what they mean or give me an example of what they are saying. I need to fully stop my thinking about what's coming next and focus on what are they saying and how do I respond to them, as well as encouraging others to do so. In fact, one of the tips that you can use sometimes is to say, could you summarize what you just heard so-and-so say? Or you summarize what you just heard them say. That helps to practice everyone listening in an active capacity. You want to also watch for the nonverbal cues. What we know from communication is this: everyone is always communicating all the time. Now, we may not be saying something, but we're communicating something. We're communicating something with our body language. We're communicating something with our eyes, with our mouths, with how we're sitting or standing. We're always communicating. And so when you're leading a discussion, you need to be mindful and watching for those nonverbal cues. How are people reacting? Now, through their eyes, through their faces, they may tell you, we do not understand the question you just asked us. Or they may tell you, I don't want to answer that question. That's too personal. They may be telling you with their bodies, I'm ready to share, but I need you to call on me, right? So watch for their nonverbal cues. But also, when you're watching for their nonverbal cues, be careful to not assume too much. Sometimes we can misread people because of how we assume someone will react. We may need to follow up later and see if something maybe brought up something that they wanted to talk about further. But pay attention to those as you are leading. And finally, you want to make sure that that discussion concludes well. I've been in many discussion questions series where people just start asking questions and then they just move on to the next activity or to the conclusion of the lesson without pausing and saying, well, here's what I heard, and here's how we could think about this conversation together. And we often just kind of need that cue to think about, okay, why did we have this conversation to begin with? So think about ways that you can conclude your conversations well, your discussion times well, and make sure that you're pointing back to the point of the conversation and transition into the next part of your lesson. Here's the thing. Discussion is more art than science. You have to practice it. You practice it with people. Now, some of you are going to be naturally gifted at just being able to, elicit a good conversation and have everybody join in discussion. And others of you, it's going to take some practice. It's going to take some time. And for some of you, maybe you realize this just isn't your gift, but someone else, well, they're really good at leading a discussion. And so maybe in your group, you'll want to partner with somebody. Don't be afraid of that. Instead, invite them into that leadership role. But here's the other thing we need to realize as part of every discussion is that different people are going to take on different roles. And sometimes just recognizing what those roles are is helpful in both planning a discussion as well as guiding the discussion. There's been lots that have been done on different kinds of roles that people play in different kinds of small groups. And so I'm going to give you a couple of different categories to think about. And you can think about one, what is the kind of participant you naturally are, as well as how do you see the different people in your groups participating. One of the ways that people participate in discussion is through what we call being an orienter. What these people will do is they will set up the conversation well. They will point towards the topic that is being discussed, and they will keep reorienting people towards, okay, what are we supposed to be talking about? Let's keep on track. These people will help you in that conversation, guide the conversation appropriately. Some people love to initiate in our conversation. They will want to maybe even ask their own question. They will bring up an idea that's related. They will be helpful in bringing about new information and a new pathway, and they will help guide the conversation along by asking their own questions or bringing up their own information. Other people in the group might be helping in kind of the gatekeeping role. These are the people that are really sensitive to making sure everybody is participating. They are helping to direct traffic. They are saying, you know what, we haven't heard from so-and-so. Or maybe they would even encourage somebody who might be contributing a little too much. You know what, that's a great idea, but could somebody else share? They may just also help you to, make sure everyone is joining in the conversation. And don't be afraid to allow that person to step in and help you in that way. Some people, well, their role is to give information. They have information that is specific to the conversation that you're having. Maybe they have certain kind of experience, or maybe they just have a certain kind of knowledge, and they want to share that. They want to participate in that way. And so allow them the opportunity to share the information that they have with the group, because then that builds trust for them. There are others in your group that, kind of stand and they cheerlead everyone. We call them the encouragers. They may not contribute something new, but rather they affirm what they hear other people say. They say, I love that idea, or that was such a great contribution. Thank you for doing that. They help to affirm what the conversation is being talked about. They're helpful in encouraging the people that are participating, and they help move that conversation along. But also, there are people that maybe just follow the conversation. Depending on how large your group is, not everyone can participate all of the time, and that's okay. Some people follow the conversation because, they don't have anything new to contribute. Or some people follow the conversation just because they're not comfortable with, contributing on this particular day. Now, as long as they are signaling that they are following the conversation, that they are staying engaged, that they're listening well, Don't make them feel bad about that, but instead allow them to have that space, because in a conversation, somebody needs to be listening. And finally, you might also have someone who's part of your group that provides some tension relief. This is the person that appropriately brings about levity, that reminds people that this time together should be joyful and fun, and maybe cracks a joke or says a pun. Or if things might be getting a little tense and heated in your conversation, they help to alleviate some of that tension appropriately. They kind of bring down the temperature of the room. Now, here's the thing. You, as a discussion leader, you may feel like, oh my goodness, I need to fulfill all of those roles. And you don't, and you can't. So instead, think about how, instead of having the responsibility of doing all of these things as you lead a discussion, instead, allow people to be who they are and allow them to work in their strengths and do the things that allow them to participate in the discussion. But here's the other thing. We know that not everybody who joins a small group, who participates in discussion, does so in a healthy way. In fact, for each of these categories, we could probably find the negative side of that category. We could find the more extreme side of that category. And so we do want to talk for a few minutes about, some of our problem people in conversation and discussion, identify them, and then talk simply about, what are some things that we could do to address their kind of behavior and address kind of the ways in which they participate in discussion. We begin with the person that enters conversation looking for counseling. We'll call this person the needy counselee. They maybe have joined this group because they do have needs. They have a problem that they need to talk about and address, and that's completely okay. But what's not okay is to turn every small group session into a session where they take over the conversation and they are talking about their problems incessantly. And though you give advice and though other members give advice, they don't take it. And instead, they just come back week after week after week to talk about their specific issue. Now, here's the thing. They are asking for help, and they're asking for it in the way that they know how, which is to you and in this group. For these kind of people, what you'll need to do is you'll need to talk to them separately. First of all, is if they start to take over the conversation, let's say for the third week, you need to say, we appreciate you and we want to care about your problem, but we need to talk about some other things today. Let's talk about that later, or connect them to someone to talk about that later, and then follow up. These are the kind of people that need help. They need resources, and they need you to connect them to the appropriate places to bring their problems. Now, it may be that because you don't meet their needs in that moment, they may feel a bit like you are kicking them out of the group, and you want to reassure them that that's not what you're doing, that you do care for them, but recognize that the problems that they have need more direct attention than what your small group can provide. We also have this whole category of people that we would call, well, the talkers. And I do say talkers because often they're not great at listening. There are different categories that we could put these people. Some would love to counsel the counselee, and they are always giving counsel to every member of the group. Some of these people, well, they have knowledge, and they like to share that knowledge, which is great within the appropriate limits. And so we might call these the academics who just want to share how much they know about everything. Or we have the people that have strong opinions and they want to make sure everyone knows their opinion about something every single time. You have some people who kind of act like a preacher and they get up on their pedestal, kind of metaphorically, and they have their pet topic that they want to talk about every time you get together. And others, well, they're your philosopher and they want to spin a yarn about things that are abstract and outside of our conversation. And here's the thing. All of these people can be really helpful for a conversation to keep it moving, to share information, to give new information to this group. But you have to practice limiting their contribution. And you need to do that very strongly and also very lovingly. You want to signal to them and to the rest of the members that, yes, you value their contribution, but you also need to value the contribution of others. If they continue to take over the conversation week after week after week, you're going to need to point out their behavior to them. And unfortunately, for some of them, maybe nobody has ever done that. Or now for some, they may say, again, I don't feel like this group is accepting me, and you may need to find a better space for them. You want them to participate. You want them to be those people that provide information or initiate the conversation. And maybe it's simply pointing them towards the positive ways that they can contribute to the conversation. We then have the extreme version of the talkers, and that's the dominator. It may have been your experience. It definitely has been mine, where I've been part of a group that someone has come in and dominated the conversation, would take kind of the metaphorical microphone and not let anyone else have it. Well, as a leader, you have to address that right away. As soon as that meeting is over, you need to have a conversation with that person and ask why. Why did they feel like they needed to have the floor of the conversation? What was it that compelled them to take over the discussion? Because that's not a discussion. Well, that's a monologue. And so maybe it is that they have an idea that they're wanting to get addressed. Maybe they have a problem and they're trying to hide from it. get to know them, get to understand, but also you need to set very clear boundaries. This is not the time and space for you to dominate the conversation, and you're not going to allow it to continue in your small group. Because here's what's going to happen. If you allow someone to dominate the conversation week in and week out, what's going to happen is most of the people will stop attending your group because you need to show stronger leadership in that moment. Definitely seek out others and pray about that situation, but you're going to need to address that one head on. Finally, we have the spiritualizer. This is the person who probably started out as the encourager, but over-spiritualizes everything and maybe tries to just dismiss conversations by saying simple platitudes rather than really wanting to dig in to the conversation and have the harder conversation. Now, for some people, maybe it's just that they are not yet mature enough in their faith and they are just mimicking what they've heard from other people, trying to say the right thing. But some people, they are using their spiritual language to hide from the fact that maybe they don't want to mature and grow. Maybe they're just trying to stay simple. And you need to encourage them to really be thinking about the words that they're saying and whether or not those words are true and whether or not those words are edifying to the group. To just over-spiritualize things maybe is shutting down a healthy conversation. When we look at these words, we recognize, wow, it is difficult to have good and healthy discussions. But also, I think you and I both know when someone is leading well and when people are participating at their best, we can have really good conversations about God, about God's word that help all of us grow, gives us new ideas, new insight into who God is, into what Scripture is saying, and what it means in our life. This is a very important part of what we do as small group leaders, and I pray that you would continue to practice, to think about the ways in which you can improve in this area and bring others into a conversation about who Christ is and what God is doing in their lives.